So this is a word that I received last night, and I know many of you guys may have been asking God this particular question, or you may have been confused about a particular thing pertaining to this. And don't you guys think back and you're like, okay, God, every enemy that has come up against me, that has tried to hurt me, it's like God has stepped in and God has blocked every single attempt from these enemies. Like, every single attempt, every try, every affliction. It's like every enemy that has come up against you, you notice that they reap the consequences right away. Like right away. Like it doesn't take long for an enemy or someone that's trying to come up against you to reap the consequence. The Bible says, touch not my anointed, do my prophets no harm. But you may have been asking God in the past, or you may have asked God recently, like, God, why is it like when every other enemy comes at me, they reap the consequences right away? They are held accountable right away. You step in right away. But when it comes to this particular enemy that has been trying to afflict me for months, for years, for however long, for decades or whatever, right? You're like, why is it this particular enemy, when they do things to me, it doesn't affect me for a long period of time, but they keep doing it again, and it seems like they're getting away with it. It seems like there's no consequences, because every time they try to afflict me or every time they try to hurt me, the plans fail, but they keep going back at it. Whereas every other enemy has learned, every other enemy has backed off, every other enemy has taken heed, every other enemy has reaped the consequences. But this particular person, it seems like they keep going and going and going and going, and no matter what, it's like, they're not learning. And although they're not learning, it's like there's no consequences. That's why they keep going back and doing it again. I want to tell you what God told me, and this is going to help you. Do you know that there's certain enemies that are on your path? They are meant to push you to your purpose. There's some enemies that come in your life and they're not even a part of the plan. That hater is not a part of the plan. That gossiper that talks about you, that slanderer, is not a part of the plan. There's some enemies who are not a part of the plan. And God will step in right away, and God will deal with them right away. Or God will warn them right away. But there's some enemies that are a part of your destiny. As in, like, they're meant to push you to where you need to be. And they are a part of your story. Okay, and this is why they'll have a main role in your story. When you watch certain movies, there's certain, you may see like, the good guys and the bad guys, and then you may see like certain characters who are good and they stay throughout the whole movie, or they stay for a long period of time throughout the movie. And then you'll see certain villains in the movie, and there's that one villain that stays till the end, and then they finally deal with the consequences at the end. And then you'll see like the little villains along the way, they don't stay, they don't last, right? There's some people, even when it comes to enemies, there's some enemies that they are meant to be a part of your testimony. They are meant to be part of your story, and they are actually being used to push you to your purpose, to push you to your destiny. Okay, like these are the enemies that are helping you throughout your training. And I know it doesn't sound like they're helping you, but in a way, trust me, they're helping you. It's like without the afflictions, you wouldn't know how to pray, fast, all of that stuff, right? So there's some people who are not a part of your testimony and not a part of your story, and they're not meant to be there longevity wise, and God will step in right away and stop them in their tracks. And then there's some that, God will allow them to kind of be there for a period of time, and then he will step in when it's the right time, and they'll reap the consequences for their actions. So the reason for this is because God will specifically use those who are prideful, who continuously come up after you. God will use those enemies as an example, to set an example. Okay, it's just like God used Pharaoh to set an example, right? Listen, Pharaoh was a longtime enemy to the Israelites. He was there for a period of time, and Pharaoh's hard-hardened, and he went back after the Israelites even after he set them free. His pride wouldn't let them go, basically, right? But God allowed that to happen. That's why God had a role to play in allowing Pharaoh's heart to harden and allowing him to go back after them and not stopping him in his tracks. God could have stopped Pharaoh in his tracks right then and there, but God didn't stop Pharaoh in his tracks until he got to the ocean and Moses was able to part the sea. That's when God chose to stop Pharaoh in his tracks. But why didn't God stop Pharaoh in his tracks before that? God gave Pharaoh warnings, but God could have just striked things down right away. You know what I'm saying? That's because Pharaoh had a role to play in Moses' purpose and the Israelites' purpose, basically, right? Pharaoh had a long role to play, and Pharaoh had to stick throughout the testimony to get to that outcome. You see what I'm saying? But yes, God did send warnings. God made Fathom come on the line. God had the angel of death come on the line. Like, there are so many warnings, and you're like, God, you're giving him too much warnings. This is why God will give your enemies like so much warnings, right? Because what happens is when it gets to that period of time where consequences need to happen, they can't sit there and say that they were not warned. They cannot sit there and say that this is not fair. They have no excuse. They know they have to reap the consequences for their actions. Why? Because God has been warning them for a long period of time. You see what I'm saying? So there's some people God will deal with them right away, and then there's some people God will have mercy over and over and over again. They'll be warning over and over and over again, and they will continue to come after you. They will continue to keep going and going and going and going, right? But when it's time for them to reap the consequences for their actions, God is going to use that particular person or people as an example. So your future enemies or anybody else that's trying to come up after you, they're going to remember what happened to that particular person that tried to come up after you. Every time they think about touching you, right, or trying to do you harm, they're going to instantly reflect of that situation that happened to that particular person or particular people that tried to come up after you. And they're going to think more than once, more than twice before coming up after you. You see what I'm saying? So God has to use certain enemies to set examples. And that's exactly why some of these enemies that you have, they'll back away and God will deal with them right away. And then there's some where you're like, wait, why ain't God dealing with them right away? Like the other ones, why is he allowing them? Because they have to be a part of the testimony. They have to be part of the plan. They're part of the purpose. People are going to see the glory of God. People are going to see how you overcame specific obstacles. God will use certain people as examples because it's a part of the testimony, and God will show people what will happen to them through that particular person or through these particular people. Okay, I love you guys. I'll talk to you soon. Bye.